Hi, I'm Doug Goldstein from Profile Investment Services based here in Jerusalem. I'd like to thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Ron Zalbin and I have given a number of talks at the AACI. So first of all, let me just say thank you to the AACI for sponsoring us and for bringing us over. The last time we spoke about issues that U.S. expatriates have, and we spoke about the book, The Expatriate's Guide to Handling Money and Taxes. I wrote the book along with Ron Zalbin, an accountant, and Dave Wolf, an international tax attorney. Be sure to check out that book at expatguidetomoney.com. You can also buy the book on Amazon. In today's discussion, we're going to be focusing on a few other issues, a lot of which relate to retirement. So I just want to let you know that you can also get a copy of the retirement planning book that I wrote. You could buy it on Amazon, or for a limited time, we're going to be offering it for free on our corporate website. You can download it as an ebook there by signing up for our newsletter. To get that, just go to www.profile-financial.com and get a free copy of the retirement planning book. I hope it helps you out, and thanks again for joining us. Okay, thank you all very much for coming. My name is Doug Goldstein. I run a company called Profile Investments based in Jerusalem. We do investment services and financial planning. I've also written a book, which is why I'm here. In fact, you can see it here. Have any of you gotten a copy of this as an ebook? So I will give you a hint. Here's my first bit of financial wisdom. You can buy the book on Amazon for $15, or you can download the book for free at my company website as an ebook at profile-financial.com, and that's on one of the resource sheets you have. So I recommend getting it there. But if you'd like to pay a royalty to me, go ahead, go to Amazon and buy the book for $15. I'd like to thank Ron for bringing up something important also about another book that we've spoken about, which is, well, the topic he brought up was WEP, the Windfall Elimination Provision, which, as he pointed out, can cut your Social Security payments in half. Anyone here get Social Security? Okay, so...
Social Security, does that mean the special benefit for older people?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So, yes, indeed. So if you are a Social Security recipient and you think you might be subject to getting windfall elimination provision, you might get your Social Security cut, go to the website Expat Guide to Money, also on the resource sheet, and there's a free webinar you can take to learn how to calculate the Social Security. And let me remind you, let's do two things. We'll hold questions for the end, and if you have cell phones, if you could shut them off, that would be great. Okay, so today we've got a lot to cover. We're talking about the retirement planning book, which I think is very important for everyone. Also in the back is a copy of Building Wealth in Israel. Normally it sells for 70 shekels. There's only 5 copies here. We'll be selling them for 50 shekels, and everything that we earn from that we'll give as a donation to the AACI. So first come, first serve on that. Otherwise you can buy it, call the office and buy a copy there. Okay, so today what I want to talk about is really 3 steps. The first part is financial planning. The second part is going to be specific tools that people can use in order to generate a little more income in their retirement. And the third thing that we're going to discuss is how people are using U.S. brokerage accounts in order to help them achieve some of these goals. So, anyone get stuck by the snow, by the way? I'm glad you made it through today. There was a good story I just wanted to open up with today, which was about in New York. You know, in upstate New York, I'm from New York. Anyone else from New York? Okay, go Yankees. So in upstate New York, there was an Indian tribe, and the chief had died. And so his son took over, as these things go, and all the Indian tribe people came over and they said, so chief, is it going to be a cold winter this year? And he said, let me check on that. Because they assumed, like his father, that he would just know. So he went into his office and he closed the door and he called the weatherman. And he said, is it going to be a cold winter this year? And the weatherman said, yeah, I suppose it'll be cold. So the new young chief went out to all of the Indians and he said, guys, it's going to be a cold winter. So of course, early next morning, they woke up and they all ran out and they started collecting wood. And they were working very, very hard. And then they came to the Indian chief and they said, you know, we've been working very hard. Are you sure it's going to be a cold winter? And he was feeling a little guilty, and he said, hold on, let me think. And he ran to his office, and he called the weatherman. And he said, are you sure it's going to be a cold winter? And the weatherman said, oh, I'm absolutely sure. So the new Indian chief went out, and he told his people. And so they went out again the next day, and they started collecting more and more wood to make sure they'd be warm for the winter. And again, they were kind of beat at the end of the day, and they went to the Indian chief, and they said, are you absolutely, positively sure? I mean, we're killing ourselves here. And the chief said, hold on a minute. And he went back and he called the weatherman and he said, are you absolutely, positively sure it's going to be a cold winter? And the weatherman said, oh, I'm for sure it's going to be a cold winter. So the chief said, how can you be so sure? And the weatherman said, well, I'll tell you the truth. He said, every day I'm driving to the studio to do the weather report, and every day I see hundreds of Indians out there collecting wood, and I know that they know it's going to be a cold winter. So the importance of this and the relevance, of course, to our snow is that you have to watch out where you're getting your advice. And the trick to getting good advice is to make sure that you yourself are set up at the beginning with a good financial plan. So there are a few ways that people do planning. There's sort of the poor man's guide to planning and the right way to do financial planning. So let me just quickly dispel some myths that I think a lot of people have in the way that they manage their portfolio. So one of the myths that people have is that you should spread your wealth all over the place. Now, who believes in diversification? Okay, I do also, and I preach it all the time. If any of you have read anything I've written, boy, I talk about it a lot. But one of the mistakes that a lot of what we refer to as the poor man's financial plan is they put a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit over there, and they can't really keep track of what's going on. And ultimately, they make poor decisions because they may buy something, but they never know when to sell it, or they buy something because their friend told them about it, and they don't understand what to do. Second big mistake people make is they expect unrealistic returns. There's the reality of the market. And I got to tell you, people come in and they ask me, well, what's going on in the banks and the broker and the bonds and the stock market? And I tell them what's going on. And they're very disappointed with me. What do you mean, Doug? Yeah, stock market, you can't count on it to make 10, 15, 20% a year? I said, I don't know. I'm not a prophet, right? I'm a financial planner. I'll help you get set up, but I don't know what's going to happen. And they get these unrealistic expectations, and then what happens is they get very, very disappointed. Another big area that they have is they put it off a little bit. Anyone ever hear of Dear Abby? Yes. Anyone who know who her twin sister is?
Yes.
Ann Landers. So I always like to give the example. Let's say the two of them decided that they would, when they were young, long time ago, that they would start saving. They were 20 years old, they were twins, they said, okay, let's put aside $5,000 a year for long-term savings. So Dear Abby gets a little distracted and she doesn't. She waits until she's 25 before she starts putting away $5,000 a year. And then they hit 65. So all that happened is that Dear Abby missed the first 5 years, but for the next 40 years they were putting away their money. Obviously, who's going to have more money? Ann Landers. By how much? What percentage do you think she'll have more? Twice. Right? In other words, just missing those first few years and starting tomorrow, Dear Abby really messed herself up. Another big mistake that we again refer to the poor man financial planning is they love their children. Who loves their children? All right, we got to stop that. Like them, but not enough to bankrupt yourself. Okay, my favorite example of this is I had a client came in, and they weren't stupid, I want to tell you. They were bright people, but they just didn't see the big picture. And they got an inheritance of $250,000. And they had 5 sons. And the wife said to me, she said when I asked her, what goals do you have? And she said, well, we have 5 sons. We'd like to give $50,000 to each one of them. And the rest we'd like to use for our retirement. So I said, So I was a little shy to say, okay, let's do the math. So I said, let's do the math together. And I took out my calculator and I wrote $250,000 divided by 5 sons. And it was $50,000. And then all of a sudden she looks up and has one of those moments and realizes you can't always help your kids first. The last thing you want is for your kids to have to support you in retirement. So the critical thing is make sure you're okay first and then help them out. So that's one of the big mistakes. And the last thing is believing that investing is the same thing as planning. They're related, of course, but they're really quite different. So this is what financial planning really looks like. So the first thing you have to do is take a snapshot of where you are today. Understand what your assets are, what your liabilities are, and where you want to go. Basically, we'll tell people a lot of times that financial planning is simply looking at where you are today, where you want to go, and what's the path to get there. The next thing you have to do is to begin to anticipate what problems will arise. So one of the problems that we spoke about earlier is that your Social Security payments will be cut. So who believes that Social Security will be in business in 5 years? Who believes it'll be in business in 10 years? All right. Who's not going to be collecting Social Security in 30 or 40 years? All right. That's just one problem. And the problem, which maybe you didn't know about, is if you tell them about your Israeli pension, they'll probably cut what you're getting paid. So that's a barrier. So you got to learn about these things. Then you develop an asset allocation model, which is basically a fancy way of saying a pie chart. What percent do I want in stocks or bonds or cash? And that will depend on a number of factors, not the least of which is your tolerance for risk, which is just a nice way of saying how much pain can you stand when your portfolio goes down. The next thing is then actually to do it, right? You've got to go ahead. You've developed your asset allocation model. You have to invest. Do you know how many people have written wills and never signed them? You know what good that is in court? Very little. Right? Same thing with asset allocation models. People will go ahead and do the plan, and unless you work with someone or you have the do-it-yourselfness to do it yourself, people often don't end up actually doing what they planned. And finally, you have to keep an eye on it. This is an ongoing basis, and then you start again. Every so often, you reevaluate, you see what you have, where you're going. Each of these steps is important, and that's the financial plan. Now, let's talk about an area which is critical for retirees. How many people here are retired? Okay. And by the way, by way of disclaimer, this is actually very important. I know that people disclaim things all the time. I just really want to teach about a few investments that people use. It is clearly not a recommendation for any one person, but I think it's important that investors understand these ideas because they will come up or you'll read about them, and all too often people go, oh, that's a great idea. And then they put money, and then they get disappointed when they find out it doesn't work out quite the way they expected. So again, take this really, really as educational to learn a little bit about it. So first of all, income investments are investments that pay you some sort of income, whether it comes in the form of interest or dividends or maybe rental income that you get. So we'll talk today about bonds. We're going to talk about stocks that pay dividends, and we'll talk about different types of real estate. So when you look at bonds, a bond, by the way, is simply a loan that you make to a country or to a government or to a company. And what are the two main conditions? Does anyone know? They owe you the money. It's a loan. You lend someone money, he has to pay you back. And they will pay you interest, normally on an annual basis or a semi-annual basis. So retirees love to buy bonds because you buy the bond. Every 6 months you get an interest payment, and you take that interest payment and you spend it, right? In fact, the image of retirees often has been people living, sitting on the beach, and they would clip the coupons from the bonds. I've actually never seen a coupon, and I've been in the business for over 20 years, but our IRS representative has. And, our California state tax authority person has. But the concept is it pays you regular income. And if you're not retired and you don't need the income, what's the best thing to do with it? Reinvest it. So there are pros and cons to bonds. One of the key benefits, right, you can see them all here, is they have predictable income. They pay every 6 months unless they default, right? That's a benefit. The disadvantage is what we would call interest rate risk. Let's say you buy a bond today and you make 3%. And then next year, let's say interest rates go up to 4%. Who thinks interest rates will be up to 4% next year? Okay. At some point, maybe they'll go up. Your 3% bond is kind of locked in, so that's a risk that you have. Another key benefit people like about bonds is that the income is guaranteed. Who guarantees the income? The issuer of the bond. So let's say you had a beautiful, diversified portfolio of bonds from Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, General Motors, Enron, WorldCom, 5 different bonds. Detroit, right? What would have happened? right? What would have happened? Okay, so you'd have been out of luck, right? It generally doesn't happen. I'm not trying to scare you, but I want you to know there are really big companies, there are really big names, there are cities and states that have a lot of problems, and they can default. That's the risk. Another benefit of bonds is you get a much better income stream than money in the bank, right? Money in the bank today pays about 0%. If you're lucky, maybe you'll get 0.1%. Right? There are all sorts of deals on CDs and arrangements you can get, and we shop around for clients to find that. But at the end of the day, short-term money in the bank, or if you have a money market fund, today is paying next to nothing. The problem then, of course, is if you put the money into a bond and you decide to sell it at some point, you might get back less than you paid. We call that liquidity risk. Bonds are simply not as liquid as money in a bank deposit. Okay, so that was the bond side. Still, people in their retirement will buy stocks, and there are benefits to pros and cons to stocks as well. One of the key benefits of getting a dividend-paying stock is you get quarterly income, right? Every quarter, the company is going to pay you a dividend, and once again, you can spend that or you can reinvest. The big disadvantage, of course, of stocks is anyone owned stocks in 2007? How is that for a follow-up year? 2007, 2008, 2009. Very, very painful. Not good for everyone, right? It's certainly not appropriate for everyone who can't stand that level of risk. So there's just the volatility. And no one knows how to predict before the market drops. So don't assume, I'll just watch and just before it goes down, I'll sell. So you have another benefit of owning dividend-paying stocks is that good companies will sometimes increase their dividends, and that's a great hedge against inflation. The disadvantage we spoke about was the risk of principal. That's a con. And that hedge against inflation is critical because as a retiree, one of the I would say 2 or 3 top risks that you have is inflation risk, right? That goes along with longevity risk, right? People just live way too long these days. Hopefully Obamacare will fail, right? No, I'm kidding. Hopefully everyone will live and be healthy, but you have to pace yourself. When we do financial plans for people, we often assume that they're going to live into their hundreds. Oh, I'm sorry. The disadvantage there was that the dividend could be cut, right? And that does, if a company's having hard times, they're going to stop paying their dividend. By the way, if they stop paying their dividend, not only do you stop getting the dividend, but what else is likely to happen? The price of the stock will drop. Who wants to buy a stock? Who wants to hold the stock as it's going down in value? Okay, now there's something called REITs, R-E-I-T. That stands for? Right, Real Estate Investment Trust. Basically what a REIT looks like is a stock. As far as you're concerned, it'll feel like you're owning a stock. So you buy the REIT on a stock exchange. You call your stockbroker. You call someone like me, right, who may buy or sell REITs. And you buy it. And now what is that? It's a package, or it's a company, let's say, that owns properties. So the underlying asset are buildings or shopping centers or medical facilities or factories, and depending on the type of REIT, it might even own mortgages. So it's very connected to the real estate industry. And there are pros and cons to that as well. The first pro is the REITs are required to pay out 90% of their income as a dividend. So that's great. That means that most of the income that comes in is going to come to you in terms of cash flow. Some of it goes to management, which, of course, is the ongoing fees. That's the disadvantage. But on the other hand, you don't have to buy that property, and someone else will manage it for you. A nice thing about REITs also is you get a huge amount of diversification. Let's say that you had $100 million. Okay, we won't go there. Let's say I had $100 million and you decided to buy a big building in New York City. You'd buy one big building. Let's say you bought twin buildings, right? And one of them got knocked down, or 2 of them got knocked down. You know, by the way, that when they were knocked down, only one of them was insured? Yeah, bad luck. Anyway, so it's hard to diversify, even with $100 million. I guess with $100 million you could. But with $100 million, or let's say $100,000, you want to diversify. It's hard to buy a lot of properties in different countries. But a REIT will allow you to do that. The disadvantage with some REITs is that they lack liquidity. Some of them, there are certain deals or certain arrangements where they don't sell so easily. So don't always assume that you can buy something and sell it. Make sure that whatever you're looking at is going to be trading with a lot of volume on the exchange. Another benefit of REITs is there's simply no hassle. You want to buy and sell it. It's a transaction normally that can happen in a minute. No lawyers, no real estate agents. I apologize to any lawyers and real estate agents in the room. Not that you're a hassle, but it does make more time. It does take more time. And of course, the difference, by the way, of owning a REIT and owning an individual property, people often say, you know, Doug, I bought an apartment in Jerusalem. It's never gone down in value. How do you know it never went down in value? Just someone knocking on your door every day? Hi, today your apartment went up $1,000. It doesn't happen, right? You don't know. It's just not listed. It's not liquid. It goes up and down all the time. So let's compare that to buying private real estate. First of all, the benefit of owning a property, right? You take your retirement, you cash out your Keren Ishtamut, and you buy an apartment, and then you collect the rent. It's very nice. The disadvantage is, of course, you have to collect the rent. Another disadvantage or risk is you need some startup capital. If you don't have enough money, it's often hard to buy a property or to buy several properties. Another benefit of buying apartments is there is the potential for capital appreciation. For example, let's say 5-10 years ago, you bought a whole slew of apartments, we said in Detroit before. You know, you can buy properties in Detroit for like $1,000 now. This is an example of things that also go down in value. So be aware that there is the potential for increase, but there is also the potential for loss. Being a landlord is a drag. Anyone ever have any of you ever been a landlord? Anyone ever not like your tenant? Okay. It can be anyone, a tenant who's a real pain in the neck to his landlord. Okay. So you know the experience, or you certainly heard the stories. Nice to own a real asset, right? People just like owning brick and mortar. That's a benefit. And the disadvantage, of course, of owning an actual property is if you need to sell it. Let's say you put in $500,000 and bought a property, and then your kid needed $100,000, and this was one of your kids who you love. What can you do? Right? You can mortgage against it, but then there's risks that you'll have to pay the mortgage. You could sell off the den. You tell your tenant, I'm sorry, you got to move out of the den. I'm going to sell that for $100,000. You can't do that, right? They're not terribly liquid. Okay, so that's real estate. Now let's cut to the last thing, and then we're going to wrap up. I just want to talk to you about how you can buy some of the investments and some of the benefits that people have by using a U.S. brokerage account. Anyone ever hear of FATCA? FATCA. Okay, so if you weren't here last time Ron and I spoke, we frightened many, many people about a filing requirement, which is nicely called FATCA, which is the Foreign Bank Account Transaction, FATCA. Ron, I'll look.
Foreign Account Tax Compliant Act.
Foreign Account Tax Compliant Act. It just says you basically have to tell the IRS about every single account you have overseas. And if anyone here is an accountant in the room and you've helped clients file it, maybe you know what a nightmare it is. It's very difficult, and if you mess up, not that your accountant would, but if you mess up, the fines are huge. So having your assets in the States, if any of you do, has a big benefit, which is you don't have to, for those assets, you don't have to file FATCA. A few other benefits, we spoke about making tax filing easier, is you have access to the types of investments that you're used to. How many people in here are not U.S. citizens? Okay. So the types of things you're used to, like stocks and bonds and mutual funds, and the prospectus is written in English, and the statements in English, is a big benefit. A lot of people find it easier to keep their money at least in something that they understand. And oftentimes we make the joke that the clients that we work with are the people who've dedicated their lives to Israel, but not their money. And another big benefit to having a U.S. brokerage account is when you die, or if someone else in your family should die, it makes the transfer of the assets much easier. So if any of you ever dealt with things like medallion guarantees and getting certain signature guarantees to pass assets to the next generation, you'll know that it's very difficult in many cases when you're living overseas. But if the money's held in a U.S. brokerage account, and I'm sorry to say many of our clients, because we help them with their U.S. brokerage accounts, many of our clients, when they pass away, or their heirs, find that there's no problem with the U.S. brokerage account because it's designed for passing on to the next generation. But as soon as they have something that's held in a slightly different way, in some sort of individually with a mutual fund, or they own stock certificates, or they own foreign assets, all of a sudden it's much harder. So make it easier for your heirs, at the very least, and tell them that you've set everything up in a U.S. brokerage account, and then pretty much everything will just follow your will. Okay, so the last thing I just want to wrap up with now is some important resources on that sheet that you have. is we've got, again, I want to remind you, you can buy a copy of the retirement planning book at Amazon. Go ahead. Or get a free download at profile-financial.com. All these websites are on that sheet that we have in the back. My next book, I will give you I'm excited to introduce it, is a book that I'm writing with world chess champion Susan Polgar. Anyone here play chess? All right, so we're writing about how strategies from chess can be applied to financial planning. The name of the book is appropriately called Rich as a King: How the Wisdom of Chess Can Make You a Grandmaster of Investing. So if you're interested in learning about it, we put together what we call our Grandmaster's Toolbox, which has a number of resources. It's a free ebook you can get at richasaking.com. The Expatriate's Guide is, if you didn't know what I was talking about when I said the word FATCA, or if you deal with overseas tax issues, Ron and I and a few other people put together this book. It's critical that you read it and understand what's going on. The last thing is the book is the Building Wealth in Israel, which I wrote a while back. And again, we have, I think, 5 copies here for sale. All the proceeds, the 50 shekels a piece, will go to AACI once they run out. That's it. So don't all fight to the back of the room. You can pay Yoram for that. And thank you very much.